Hello, ma'am. Ma'am, I think your mic is muted. Can we start the session, ma'am?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am.
Good afternoon to one and all gathered here. Write until it becomes as natural as breathing, and write until not writing makes you concerning. Writing is a painting of voice. So, my extortionate budding writers, paint your voice innovatively. With this note, I profoundly welcome all the dignitaries, exhilarated staff members, and aspirational students to the afternoon session of the International Conference on Creative Writing. To create desire, one must introduce higher aspect of consciousness into our awareness. To introduce our guest of honor and speaker, we request Madam V. Chandra, Assistant Professor, BG and Research Department of English. Please, Madam.
A happy afternoon to one and all present here. I am delighted to introduce our guest of honor of this session, Ms. Shweta Prakash, author and Chief Publishing Officer at Pachyderm Tales, London. Shweta Prakash is an award-winning writer who holds MA in Creative Writing from the University of Warwick. In addition to her credits, she holds post-graduation in Communication Management from the Symbiosis Institute of Media and Communications, Pune. Shweta Prakash has authored 12 books, including children's books, a poetry collection, a short story collection, and creative non-fiction books. Her short story, The Butterfish and Geefish and Other Nonsense Stories, has won the prestigious Times and Scottish Book Trust New Writer Award to spend a month at a writing residency at the Hebridean Isle of Jura. Shweta has also been a recipient of the British Council's Charles Wallace India Trust Award, which offered her to study the creative writing at the Scottish Union's International Summer School at the University of Edinburgh. One of her children's books, Padma Goes to Space, has been published in several Indian languages and highly ranked in the media as one of the best children's books to come out of India. Shweta Prakash has illustrated 4 books, including a Spanish book of stories. In addition, she has edited the book Storytelling for Educators for the storytelling NGO Kathalaya. Shweta Prakash is deeply influenced by Indian philosophical and mythical traditions, which enabled her to master the skill of magical storytelling. Books of Shweta Prakash are available at India's best online shopping stores in Amazon, Flipkart, and even more. Recently, Pachyderm Tales, in association with Ukiota Publishing, published 2 of her children's books, Pie Chart and How the Eland Twisted Its Horns. Shweta's vast experience, knowledge, and comprehension of publishing industry strengthen Pachyderm Tales. Her contribution and dedication is even more witnessed in bridging the budding creative writers and the jumbo clan of Pachyderm Tales. To be inspired is great, but to be an inspiration is honor. May I invite the women of inspiration and creation, Ms. Shweta Prakash, to deliver the speech on the title, Writing the Word and Wording the Rights. 3 women writers, Margaret Atwood, Suniti Namjoshi, and Jeanette Winterson. A hearty welcome, ma'am. Now the platform is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chandra. That was very kind of you. Actually, I think one needs to be very courageous to be able to talk about writers like Margaret Atwood, Jeanette Winterson, and Suniti Namjoshi. And you need to be very courageous because they've written so much and they've inspired generations of women. And but the courage that I got to speak about this topic came from reading their works, and their work has always inspired me to be bold and courageous. These 3 writers have been very important and influential for me. I have been reading them since a very young age. And Suniti Namjoshi of whom I'm especially very fond of reading because I feel I've discovered her. I know a lot of people have not heard of Suniti Namjoshi as much as they would have heard of Margaret Atwood, but Suniti Namjoshi is Indian. And having discovered her writing accidentally in a library and just fallen in love with it, I would like to start with an anecdote. There is a book by hers which I found called Mothers of Maya Deep. And this book is essentially about women, a community of women which live as women, and that there are no men there. So I was so inspired. At the time, I was in my college, and we were a women's college. It was in Bangalore, and so I could really associate with that. But it was only when I joined Pachyderm Tales and I encountered Dr. Lakshmi Priya's vision for working with women, making women agents. I mean, for me, it immediately brought that book to life for me, working with Dr. Lakshmi Priya from Pachyderm Tales. Now, all these three women are extreme. Margaret Atwood, of course, every student of literature and even otherwise people have heard of because she's won 2 Bookers. She is a Canadian author. She was born in 1939. And she's the first in many, many things. And it's not that she's just an author. I mean, she's an environmental activist. She's a human rights activist. She has worked with Amnesty. And she's such a prolific writer. She has written so many things. And children's writing, memoirs, non-fiction, obviously fiction, short stories, long form, poetry. There's nothing that she has not touched. She's also an inventor. So she's invented something called the long pen, which enables writers to write with using robotic devices. So she has created this using technology. Suniti Namjoshi was born 2 years after Margaret Atwood, and that was in 1941. She was born in Mumbai, and she studied in Pune, and she cleared the IAS in the 1960s. So for me, it was very exciting because when I was in college, the liberalization of the Indian economy had not yet happened. So for us at that time, when we would open the newspaper, Times of India was the main newspaper, or Hindu. And when we would open the newspaper, we will say XYZ is the coaching institute to get into IAS. And so has cleared IAS. Interview with person from IAS. And most of these people would, of course, be men. So in the 1960s, when I found this book by myself in the library, this book by this author called Suniti Namjoshi, I realized she had cleared the IAS in the 1960s, and that was remarkable. And then she of course went on to study more, and she left the IAS, and then she did a PhD on Elsa Brown from McGill University, and she's a remarkable person. She's a remarkable writer, and her writing really energizes you. It motivates you, and she takes from cultural motives, from Indian motives, from the world cultural motives, and she rewrites it. And she's a very bold and influential writer. And then you have Jeanette Winterson. Jeanette Winterson is slightly younger, and she was born in 1959. And she was adopted. So she was adopted by Mr. and Mrs. Winterson, and they raised her to be a missionary. And she had to leave home when she was 16 years old, and she did a lot of odd jobs. So she was a machinist at Marks and Spencer's, and she worked at she did a lot of odd jobs actually to support herself. She lived in a van. Then she went to Oxford. Here I must mention that Margaret Atwood had gone to Harvard. So Suniti Namjoshi also, apart from the IAS, had a PhD from McGill University. So all these women, these three women, are highly educated, and the way they educated themselves is also different because they struggled at that particular time. For women to educate themselves in Margaret Atwood and Suniti Namjoshi's time was difficult. And in Jeanette Winterson's case, she had no family support. She was the adopted child, and she had to leave home, and she was living in a truck. And then she somehow got admission into Oxford, and then she cleared Oxford and she studied there. So they're very inspirational, remarkable women. And they have influenced me a lot. And so that's why I got the boldness to talk about these women, because their writing is so bold. Otherwise, it is not possible for even in one lifetime to cover their work, because they've written so much. So I've prepared a presentation. Can I share it with you?
Sure, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
I'll just
anybody,
check it.
yeah, I'll just share it.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I think screen sharing is
Yes,
disabled
ma'am.
right
Yes, ma'am.
now.
I'll just check it, ma'am.
Oh, okay. So in the meantime, let me just talk more and maybe it will be enabled in some time. So uh, these three women are women writers, they're women activists. They Margaret Atwood, of course, says that her writing is not necessarily feminist. But she's gone on record saying that. But she's also gone on record saying her writing is proto-feminist because it was before the second wave of feminism started. So it was before people actually started articulating the second wave feminism that her book Edible Woman came out. So she refers to it as proto-feminist rather than feminist. And I'll just check on the screen sharing.
Ma'am, yes, ma'am. Now you can share the screen, ma'am.
Okay. So I'll just share the screen. Just one
Yes.
minute. Because I want to show you their photos. So instead of my
Sure,
talking,
ma'am.
you can
Sure,
look
ma'am.
at them.
Yes, ma'am.
So can you see the screen?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. It's visible.
Okay. So today's presentation is Writing the Word, Wording the Rights, three women writers, Margaret Atwood, Jeanette Winterson, and Suniti Namjoshi. So it has been said that where there's a woman, there is magic. But what I personally feel is where there is Margaret Atwood, where there is Suniti Namjoshi, and where there is Jeanette Winterson, there is a lot of magic that happens. So these are our writers. This is Margaret Atwood, this is Jeanette Winterson, and this is Suniti Namjoshi. And I'm so proud there is an Indian getting featured in these three prominent writers. Now, what these three writers share, their writing is wild, audacious, frank, energetic. They are warm and they are enthusiastic. They are witty and they are wonderful. And they're writers who care about writing. They're writers who care about their craft. They all use myth and fairy tale, and there is a definite focus on gender. So now let's look at what Jeanette Winterson and Margaret Atwood share. So they've been picking material from the similar sources. And Margaret Atwood, one of her famous books is the Penelopoid, which is the Penelope's version of the famous Greek classic Ulysses. So Margaret Atwood has articulated Ulysses from Penelope's perspective, from a woman's perspective, and the perspective of the women who were involved in that story, whose voice was suppressed in the original Greek myth. Similar. Now, Jeanette Winterson, very interestingly, also rewrites Greek myth, but she takes two male characters, Atlas and Heracles, and she writes their story, and this is recorded as Waits. And these two were published in the Canongate Myth series. So they were part of the same series published by the same publisher, and Karen Armstrong was the editor of that particular series. Now, the interesting thing about Jeanette Winterson, and this is something that has influenced my personal writing, is that she often writes from a male point of view. So apart from writing from a female point of view, you will find books of hers which are male characters writing in first person or male point of view characters about whom the point of view is following a male character. And for me, this was very influential when I started writing because I realized that you have to move out of your skin. So, as a writer and as a woman and as somebody who is grew up in Delhi, it is very natural for me to create a character who's exactly like that. Somebody who grew up in Delhi and who's a woman from my generation, and even the name sounds similar to me, and that kind of a thing. But what Jeanette, when I read, especially there is this book by Jeanette Winterson called Gut Symmetries. So that's on quantum physics and obviously about relationships. So that has a male character. So when I started writing, I was deeply influenced. So I I would create male characters. So through her, I learned to write point of view characters when I used to do my creative writing from a male point of view. And this teaches you to step out of your skin because all this is binary. Like Dr. Lakshmi Priya was talking yesterday, why are we calling some writers, feminist writers, and then we are saying gender literature. So we are saying there is literature and there is feminist literature. So that is not correct. All literature must be inclusive. So this binary of male and female, Jeanette Winterson actually questions it. And she has a lot of male characters whom she writes from a male point of view. So while Margaret Atwood has written Penelope, which is about Penelope's version of the Ulysses original Greek myth, Jeanette Winterson has written Wait, which is about Atlas and Heracles. Now, the next thing is what, again, Jeanette Winterson and Margaret Atwood share. They're picking material from the same sources. So both of them have been deeply influenced by Shakespeare, and Margaret Atwood has gone on record that saying that she's read Shakespeare when she was in school and she was very influenced. And recently they have both brought out books which are cover versions. And the reason I use the word cover is the word we use for musical remakes. But I use the word cover because for me, these writers are so musical in their writing. There is so much of musicality in their writing that to me, it sounds like a cover version. So they've done cover version of The Gap of Time. Gap of Time is a cover version of Shakespeare's A Winter Tale. And Hackseed is a cover version of The Tempest. So they've done their own modern version, contemporary version of both the plays. And so both these writers are obviously influenced by the same cultural influences. Now we again look at what Jeanette Winterson and Margaret Atwood share. They are both interested in the fiction of the future. So Margaret Atwood has done the Mad Adam trilogy, and the first book of that, Oryx and Crake, is particularly very famous. And it is the fiction of the future, of the dystopian future. It is beyond dystopia. It is the, I mean, it is can only be called fiction of the future. And Jeanette Winterson takes the myth of Frankenstein, which is obviously something in the past, but she adds to it what is happening in terms of AI. So now what is interesting about all the three writers, and but specifically about Margaret Atwood and Jeanette Winterson, is that they are very interested in technology. So Margaret Atwood is an inventor herself, and she has invented some robotic devices for writing better. But for Oryx and Crake, for example, she says that everything she has written is based on research on genetics. So she says, I still have the documentation with me, and you can read it. I will prove to you that everything that the story says is possible or has happened is through her understanding of contemporary genetics. So the story is firmly based in contemporary genetics. And another story of hers, so all her stories are well researched, but she was specifically saying this of Oryx and Crake. And so both Margaret Atwood and Jeanette Winterson are very interested in technology. So they are embracing it, they're talking about it, but they're also aware of what problems it may cause for the future. So they don't hesitate about talking about technology and what its implications are. And Suniti Namjoshi actually did a project called Building Babel. It was a book, but it had an online version. So that version used to be available when I was younger, but now I'm not able to find it on the internet. So in that, you could go, you as somebody who's a user of the internet could just go and add to that book, the final chapter of that book, Building Babel, which was a culture project or a culture book on cultural blocks. Then let's look at what Margaret Atwood and Suniti Namjoshi share. So I am so proud to be able to put this up because obviously Margaret Atwood is a very well-known Canadian author who has won the Booker 2 times. And Suniti Namjoshi is our own author. She is our Indian author. And to look at how they are drawing from the same sources and writing about the same things is so encouraging for me, and it is encouraging for all of us that we are writing out of the global context, and we can also pick the same subjects that Margaret Atwood is picking up and do wonders with it like Suniti Namjoshi has done. So they both have done feminist retellings of myths and fables. So this is Margaret Atwood's Good Bones, and is one example. Obviously, she deals with the subject in many other contexts. And feminist fables, for which is considered a feminist classic by Suniti Namjoshi, is another example. Then we have what Jeanette Winterson and Suniti Namjoshi share. They share issues of gender and orientation. They ask you, do you have to be straight? So they are both lesbians, and they have gone in public writing about their experiences, and they have encouraged other people to talk about their experiences, and they both fight homophobia. So that is what Jeanette Winterson and Suniti Namjoshi share. So Jeanette Winterson's first book, Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, is about her experiences of being the adopted child and being trained to become a missionary and then discovering that she's a lesbian. And Suniti Namjoshi is Mothers of Mayadeep, and this is just an example. She is a well-known author who has recorded her experiences. And for example, there is Conversations of Cow, and in which the Suniti herself is a character, and there is a cow. And the derogated term is used against her and the cow. So they have championed extensively for LGBT rights, both of them. What the three writers share, they have all written children's books. So Jeanette Winterson has written Tanglevrek. Margaret Atwood, actually, I was not aware that she's written so many children's books, but she has written a lot of children's books. But the reason I was not aware is that Margaret Atwood has written so many books. So most in India, most of the books that are available are her adult books, but she has written small children's books, picture books also. And Suniti Namjoshi has written Aditi and the One-Eyed Monkey. And this book is brought out by Tulika. And incidentally, Tulika published one of my books also, Padma Goes to Space. So I had once gone to the Tulika office, and I was waiting to meet the editor. And Viji was at the shop. They have a shop where they sell the books. So she told me that, have you read Suniti Namjoshi? So I was like very excited. I said, of course I've read Suniti Namjoshi. So so that was a personal connection, wherein for me it's very exciting, because Suniti Namjoshi is a remarkable writer, and her writing just energizes me. So that was just a personal sharing. Then again, what all the three writers share, they've all written poetry. And this is a poem that I found written by Jeanette Winterson. And in this poem, there is a sentence, three women writing the past into the future. So it was almost like she was writing about this presentation that I'm going to make, in which is about these three women who are writing in the past into the future. But obviously, she had not written this poem for me, but I read and I felt it was so apt for today. So I'll just read this poem. They all write poetry, and at some point I will share the poetry of Margaret Atwood and Suniti Namjoshi also. So, fossil record of a miracle, bone by bone, word for word, three women writing the past into the future, line by line. Listen to the wild fell of your heart. Do not betray what you love. The earth opens like a book. You will come back to me then, Brontesismo. So she's writing about a dinosaur, and I think it was for an online project. But this sentence, three women writing the past into the future, could be the title of our presentation today. So this, I wanted to share this. Now I'm going to the Margaret Atwood section. Some of the things I want to share. I'm mainly putting up book covers and a few readings, and so that you can see the some of their work, and you can see their photos, so that you can connect with them, and also some of their writing, so that you can hear what their words are and why it's so inspiring. So these are some of her children's books, and I put this up because I know that a lot of people don't, everybody has heard of Margaret Atwood, but nobody knows that she's a children's author. So that's why I put up this slide. So So this book was very important for me, Good Bones, because I have actually met Margaret Atwood. I met her when I was on a scholarship, and the British Council and the Charles Wallace India Trust had given me a scholarship to study creative writing at Edinburgh. So at that time, there was a Edinburgh Literary Festival, and we could, as a part of our scholarship, the scholarship was on postmodernism and creative writing, and it was during the Edinburgh Festival we had our classes. So one of the authors who had come in at that time was Margaret Atwood. So I went up to her, and I for the purpose of purchasing a book and getting an autograph. So she saw that I was Indian, and she asked me, "How do you know how many hands Kali has?" So I told her, and then she signed the book, and I was so thrilled. But the book that she signed for me was this one, Good Bones, and this was a book I had read much many years before that, and it's a retelling of classics and fables. So anyway, that was a personal experience, but it was very exciting and thrilling for me to meet Margaret Atwood when I was on a scholarship. So Good Bones is all about women reclaiming their narratives with wit. The author serves as a muse for other authors and wannabe authors. So she inspires other women to write about narratives, that cultural narratives that have been with us for generations, and she inspires women to rethink these narratives, and the mass of cultural hand-me-downs are dissected and revisited. Then these are two books by Margaret Atwood, which are dystopian. And out of this, The Testaments has won the Booker. And it won the Booker in 2019. But I am very sorry to say I was not able to read The Testaments at that point. I purchased it, and but I was because it was so dystopian. And usually I love Margaret Atwood, and I've read The Handmaid's Tale when I was very young. I read it in school, but at that time I used to read more dystopian fiction. So I was used to reading 1984. Then O.P. Vijayam has written a dystopian fiction. So if you know what dystopia, it's about reality that's completely gone wrong, and takeover of totalitarian states, and that kind of a thing. So Testaments is of course a follow-up to The Handmaid's Tale, but I'm sorry to say I never read it. But Handmaid's Tale, of course, I've read, and I've it really, I mean, it was scary. It was in some at some point Margaret Atwood says that I don't write science fiction. You can call it speculative fiction, otherwise just call it social science fiction. So it is. So I love that term, social science fiction. So it is. It is almost like she's recreating society for us and telling us what has been and what could be. And it's a remarkable book. It's really remarkable. I hope I read the Testaments also. And then I'll read a poem by Margaret Atwood. This is just direct. This is classic Margaret Atwood. It's a small poem. You fit into me like a hook into an eye, a fish hook and open eye. So this is the remarkable thing about Margaret Atwood, that she will just talk to the reader. She just talks to the reader. And in this case, she's not referring to the reader, she's referring to somebody else. And but her writing is very direct. And I think not just Margaret Atwood, even Jeanette Winterson writes very directly to the reader. And even Suniti Namjoshi does that. So if you look at these three writers' writing styles also, you will find something very similar. They are very energizing for women. So Margaret Atwood and in fact Suniti Namjoshi, Jeanette Winterson, all of them are defined by humor. Even if you don't have one of their books, I would suggest just go to YouTube and Google for say Suniti Namjoshi or Jeanette Winterson, and especially Google for Jeanette Winterson. And there are such humorous, hilarious videos of Jeanette Winterson. Obviously, she's not a stand-up comedian, though it's interesting because writers can be stand-up comedians. For example, I was taught by A.L. Kennedy, who is a very famous Scottish writer, and she is a stand-up comedian also. So she does stand-up comedy at Edinburgh, and she's a very, very, very renowned author. but none of these writers, Margaret Atwood, Suniti Namjoshi, Janet Winterson, they're not stand-up comedians, but you can just hear them, and they the way they speak itself is so funny. So just go to YouTube and Google for Janet Winterson and just watch her videos. But I'll just read a little passage. This is the passage I picked from Life Before Man, and it's very humorous. It was Auntie Muriel who taught her how to keep a bank account, how to balance a checkbook, what interest was. Though Auntie Muriel regarded most books as frivolous trash, even schoolwork as of marginal value, she'd spent a good deal of time on this part of Elizabeth's education. So here books are regarded as frivolous trash and even schoolwork as of marginal value. So this is really that's so typical Margaret Atwood. I mean, she'll just connect you with characters who are well funny, and she'll write about them in a very interesting way. And but we in real life also we would have met people who think books are trash and don't give much value to education. And for us who love education and who love reading, all this is very frustrating. So she brings that forth so beautifully in this passage. In fact, I'm so regretful that I've not been able to put all the passages, because we should just read these writers. They're so amazing. Then so that was Margaret Atwood on here. Margaret Atwood's sample passage for humor. Now I want to explain, give a passage which allows for women's rage. So where the female character would have been expected to express sympathy, she expresses rage. And when I was actually picking up this passage, I was just thinking that Dr. Lakshmi Priya actually writes like this. So I've seen her writing, and she also does do this. So we have an Indian author here who writes about who allows for women's rage in her writing. So that was, and not only is Dr. Lakshmi Priya an Indian author, she's also somebody I know. So it's very exciting for me that we can also write like Margaret Atwood. So I'll just read this passage, and it's about when the female character Elizabeth, her lover has died. He has committed suicide. So she should have expressed sympathy because he's dead, but instead she's just angry. And let's just read this. It also ends on humorous note, but it basically allows for women's stage. I wish I didn't have to think about you. You wanted to impress me. Well, I'm not impressed. I'm disgusted. That was a disgusting thing to do. Childish and stupid. A tantrum, smashing a doll. But what would you have smashed was your own head, your own body. You wanted to make a damn good and sure that I'll never be able to turn in bed again without feeling that body beside me. Not there, but tangible like a leg that's been cut off. Gone, but the place still hurts. You want me to cry, moan, sit in a rocker with a black edged handkerchief bleeding from the eye. But I'm not crying. I'm not crying. I'm angry. I'm so angry I could kill you if you hadn't done that for yourself. And then this is another sample of the edible women. And the writer strikes back is what I've written, but it's actually the woman strikes back also. And this paragraph is both funny, but it also talks about problems that women face with harassment. So I'll just read this, and this is all going in one direction. That Margaret Atwood is witty, but she is somebody who's talking about what women face every day, and she allows for female agency, like Dr. Abdul spoke about uh, yesterday. So she allows for a tremendous amount of agency in her characters. And this is a paragraph. You have no idea how soggy it is, she said, having to go through 20 conversations about the insides of people's mouths. The most reaction I got out of them was when I described an abscess I once had. They positively drooled, and most men look at something beside your teeth, for God's sake. So she's clearly talking about harassment here. And so she brings out all the problems that women face in her writing. So Negotiating with the Dead was Margaret Atwood's book, which I would recommend every aspiring creative writer here present here today to read. It is on writing, and it's on the writing process, and it was a series of lectures that she had delivered. And this I just took this example from that book. It's a paragraph heading, but it just shows how brilliantly she articulates. I mean, she pays attention to the even the small details of how she articulates her chapter headings. So it's called dedication. This is a chapter heading. Dedication, the great god pen. So instead of the great god pan, she says, who's a pagan god, she says the dedication, the great god pen. Apollo versus Mammon, at whose altar should the writer worship? So even if she's writing a small chapter heading, she pays so much of attention to it. And that is the attention that she brings into her work. And her body of work is phenomenal. It's prolific. So Margaret Atwood has been articulating the forbidden, forbidding the mundane, a window to women's wonderland, and tackling conventional thinking with wit and humor. Now, one thing I mean, there is so much to cover on Margaret Atwood, but one thing I just wanted to mention was, which I mentioned, I think, earlier also. She says that she writes social sciences fiction, and I love that term, social sciences fiction. So she says she doesn't write science fiction, she writes social sciences fiction. And Handmaid's Tale and Oryx and Crake are to be designated as such. I found this information on Wikipedia. So Wikipedia is, of course, not the best place to look for information, but somehow I found this startling piece of information there, which is social sciences fiction is what Margaret Atwood designated her own writing as. And that's a photo of Margaret Atwood smiling and making us all smile. So now I will talk a little bit about Suniti Namjoshi. Suniti Namjoshi on writing fables. So Suniti Namjoshi is known for being in two. So if people say who is Suniti Namjoshi, and people who know about it, or if you Google or if you look for information on Suniti Namjoshi, she's identified as a fabulist. Fabulist is somebody who writes fables. Fables are actually small stories that have been passed down from generations, but you can write your own fables, or you can rewrite those fables that have been written. So I just wanted to define what a fable is. It's a literary genre, a story which can be in prose or verse that features animals, legendary characters, plants, inanimate objects, forces of nature, and leads to a moral lesson. So she says that that's the official definition of fables, and she's known for writing fables. She says she would rather write a good fable than make a good point. Now, of course, every fable, typically, they say traditionally fables should have a good moral or a point to be made. So, but she says, I'm not here for making the good point, I'm for writing the fable. But if I can do both together, I'll be very happy. So, Suniti is also a poet, and this is a poem on being a poet. So, I thought it's very relevant for us because we are all here to be writers. So this poem can motivate us and tell us what exactly does it take to be a writer, or to articulate your words, or to be a poet. So this poem I'm just reading out, saying that this was what it felt like to put the right foot forward and then the left, saying that this was the taste of morning porridge, that of milk, the another of a niggling but persistent pain, saying that I suppose this was distinctive, but being unable to keep my mouth shut, my mind from working. But a poet lives like any other creature, talks perhaps more than is normal, her doom no brighter, nor her death less dismal than any other. So here she tries to remind you that a poet is just like an ordinary being. And this is a lovely poem by Suniti Namjoshi on the self-conscious process of being a writer. So Suniti Namjoshi, we should all be proud of her as an Indian. Her work is famous for challenging prejudices in gender and race, and she specifically challenges homophobia. She has written collections of fables, poetry, children's books, novels. Her book has been translated into many languages: Spanish, Italian, Chinese, Korean, Hindi, Turkish. And she's active in the feminist movement and author of the feminist classic Feminist Fable. So if you meet a feminist, they will definitely be able to list among their classics her book Feminist Fables. But some of these books are not that well known now. Earlier, when there was much less Indian writing, she was more prominent. And but Suniti's collection with Tulika is quite well known, which is for children. Then she loves rewriting traditional tales. In her writing, Suniti subverts the well-known fairy tales as well as the stories from Greek mythology, Indian mythology, and world mythology. So some of the children's books, there are more actually, but like all these writers have been writing extensively, and it just shows you that to be a writer, you just need to do one thing, which is keep writing and writing and writing and writing and writing and writing and writing. So this is the Aditi series. Aditi is the heroine, and she travels around the world and has a lot of wonderful adventures. The books are very simply written. They are wonderful books for children, for young adults, for adults. They're like fables and they're like children's stories, but they're very simple, but they have profound concepts embedded in them. There's a lot of philosophy that goes into the making of these books. So this is an example of a fable by Suniti Namjoshi, a rewritten fable or a retold telling of a traditional fable. That basically it's an example of her writing. I'll just read this out. Don't be silly, darling. Only little boys grow up to be emperors. As for little girls, they marry emperors. And they learn to hold their tongue, particularly on the subject of emperors' clothes. The lesson: she was indeed blessed with great ability, but everybody in the village was critical of her. To be so damned good, they said, is not womanly. The gods. There was once a man who thought he could do anything, even be a woman. So he acquired a baby, changed its diapers, fed the damn thing 3 times a night. He did all the housework, was deferential to men, got worn out, but he had a brother, Jack Cleverfellow, who hired a wife and got it all done. So this is highly feminist writing, a feminist version of what we read in traditional tales. So these days there's a lot of emphasis on read your traditional tale, know your traditional tale, but there are so many stereotypes in these traditional tales. There are so many biases in these traditional tales. So the project that Suniti Namjoshi has taken up, the project that Margaret Atwood has taken up, is to completely relook at the traditional tales. And this is specifically a very important project for Suniti Namjoshi. So you can just hear Suniti Namjoshi encouraging all of us to write. And she says, out of the shards of my own stories and make your own poems. That is the process. Now, this is recently there's a book that's been published. It's called The Fabulous Feminist, and it's a Suniti Namjoshi reader. And this is a book review by a PhD scholar of English literature. And it says it is playfulness that characterizes Suniti Namjoshi's work, but it is play informed by a sharp and thoughtful insight. And this playfulness, this word playfulness, is an adjective which can be applied to the work of Suniti Namjoshi, Margaret Atwood, Jeanette Winterson. All of them have the sense of playfulness, extreme playfulness, but at the same time, they're talking about serious subjects and doing very serious work. This is a rewriting of, this is a poem that was inspired by Alice in Wonderland. All the words have leapt into the air like the cards in Alice, like birds flying, reforming, swerving, rising, and each word says it is love. All the little words say they are love, the space in between, the link, the logic of love. I can make no headway in this heady grammar, and suddenly here you are, and I am, and we love. So this was a project that was on the internet. So which again building Babel, and she takes from cultural archetypes and then she rewrites them, and then she encourages you as a reader. So this was available some years ago on the internet, but now I'm not able to find the link. So the internet, being the space that gobbles up things, has gobbled it up. So our topic today, of course, is writing the word, wording the rights. So what Suniti Namjoshi says is that fables questions what happened to anyone when there is an imbalance of power. And that's why she's taken to writing and rewriting and relooking and reconsidering and reimagining fables. So this is another, this is actually a poem. It's a fable, but it's a poem also. It's a fable in a poem form, a poem in a fable form. I will just read this out, and then we will move on to the next author, which is Jeanette Winterson. Once upon a time, there were two sisters. One got married, one didn't. Once upon a time, there were two piglets. One went to the market, one didn't. One was straight, one wasn't. The point, whatever they did or failed to do, they were a great disappointment to their poor mother. Luckily for them, the two sisters loved one another. When they saw their mother was growing more and more unhappy, they proposed to her that they cut them in half, and out of the two good halves make a splendid one. Their mother refused in high indignation, but she was so wretched that the dutiful daughters went to a surgeon. The surgeon obligingly sawed them in half and then interchanged the halves and stuck them together. But there were still two of them, so there was a problem. They went back home and said to their mother, "Now choose the good one." But the mother was furious, and they had even thought of such a scheme. "You did mock me," she told them angrily. "You are both bad children." When the two sisters heard her say this, the good one wept, but the bad one smirked. So that was a rewriting of a fable, and you in all fables you have the good girl who's very good and she gets married to the prince, and then you have the bad girl who imitates the good girl and then she falls into the ditch. But that doesn't happen here. The good one weeps when the mother is not happy and calls them both bad, but the bad girl just smirks. So this is a rewriting of our classic folktale that we find in Brothers Grimm, and it's called Snow White and Rose Green. So now Jeanette Winterson's latest, now we move on to Jeanette Winterson. That's a photo of hers, which is put up on the publicity website of her books. And it's specifically referring to 12 Bytes, which is her writing on artificial intelligence. So she writes about it, and she's writing about it, and she says, "Our encounter with AI, our self-created nemesis, and I suspect our last chance may ensure that human exceptionalism will give way to humility." So what she's talking about here is that we are always talking about the Anthropocene and how humans have taken over the planet and this, that, the other. But she's actually talking about that there are going to be other life forms which are machine based, and they're also consciousness, and there's going to be a lot of problems created by technology, which is just energetically examining the possibilities of what those problems could be. So Jeanette Winterson, I think I mentioned this earlier, was an adopted child, and she was raised up to be a missionary. So she didn't have any books in her house. So she talks about how the Bible was an influence for her because there were no books in her house and she was raised to be a missionary. There were no books in our house except the Bible and some religious commentaries. The Bible was read out loud by Mrs. W being Mrs. Winterson, her adopted mother, the mother who adopts her, every day, starting at Genesis and going right down to Revelation. 66 books in all, so not bad. I am grateful for the Bible, its language, its storytelling, its certainties, its sense that the world is at once knowable and fully mysterious. That's how I feel today. And it's the language of Shakespeare. The King James Bible, commissioned by James, the first King of England, uses the same rich, self assured, poetic, powerful prose as Shakespeare did. Knowing that Bible was owing a connection to language, any working man or woman who read the Bible had no trouble reading Shakespeare. It was good for me. It gave me an edge. It gave me a chance. It meant I was fluent past the mismatches of social class and ambition. I could use words. From a household without books, I had twice daily language class soaked in how English works. So some of the awards, of course, I could have put up the awards that Margaret Atwood has won, but it would have taken me 5 slides. So I just did this for Jeanette Winterson to give some idea of how accepted and she loved she is. So I'll just quickly go through the slide, and then we go on to Jeanette Winterson worked because she left her adopted family when she was 16. And the interesting thing is she wrote about her experiences in Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit of being adopted and being raised to be a missionary and herself being an intellectual. And then she started living in a van, and then she got admission in Oxford. And she did a lot of odd jobs, and one of her books, which was a sort of narration of her own book, Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, was Why Be Happy When You Can Be Normal. So in that, she again re-examines this autobiographical information. So she's done all kinds of odd jobs, and this is something I can personally recognize with, because at various points, just for the purpose of earning money, I will send my resume to some random place, and then I will end up doing some odd job, and but I'll earn money, and I would hate it, but I would do that to sustain myself, and I've done it extensively. I've done it. Even quite recently. So I can completely get this part. And I remember once when I was working, and I was so depressed because I was doing some odd job and just trying to earn money so that I can sustain myself. And what was sort of keeping me through the period was just reading Gut Symmetries, which was by Jeanette Winterson. So I would go back home and I would read Jeanette Winterson, and it would just energize me. So these are writers who can just energize you with their writing, and you don't need anything else. They make you bold. So anyway, she talks about doing odd jobs. So she worked as a machine operator in Marks and Spencer's. I always had evening and weekend jobs, selling ice creams, working in the markets, assisting a funeral home, behind the desk in a public library. After I finished school, before I went to university, I worked in a mental hospital for a year, helping to look after the long-term inmates. The money was good, and I needed to save to get away. So then she comes to how Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit came to be. So she goes to this newly formed feminist press called Pandora, and she starts saying that, can you give me a job? I need a job. So the press, the person who's the editor of the press, hears her talk. So he says, the editor says, I won't give you a job, but if you can write the way you talk, I will publish you. And that's how her first book was published. And that was Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. And it was a big BBC series also. So now, one thing that again, Jeanette Winterson and Suniti Namjoshi share is autofiction. So they write about themselves as fictional characters. So you have this book called Saint Suniti and the Dragon. And even in Conversations with the Cow, it's Suniti as a character who's having conversation with the cow, Bhadravati. And in Sukhi, Sukhi is a cat, and Suniti is the character who's having conversations with Sukhi the cat, or they are the main characters in Sukhi. Except that I did and didn't want to be about me, because I had understood early the only way for me to change the world was to read myself as fiction as well as fact. If you're sorry, you can change the story. So oranges, and here she means oranges are not the only fruit, uses myself as a fictional character. It's me and not me. It's nearly autofiction. It's a way of experimenting with truth, not to distort it, but to distill it. Now, I personally love Jeanette Winterson as a critic. And if I had to do a presentation only on Jeanette Winterson as a critic, I would have also collaborated with, written on another writer called Susan Sontag. So Susan Sontag is also a cultural theorist, and she's passed away. She's written. There's a book of hers called On Photography, and so that book inspired me a lot, and this art objects inspired me a lot, and I wanted to write about something. So once I was looking for material to write on, so I said that when I read these Western writers like Jeanette Winterson and Susan Sontag, I always like the way they talk about culture, and they talk about culture through accessible essays, readable essays. So it's not academic writing, but essays. So I wanted to write a book on some aspect of Indian culture. So I started work on this book on Indian storytelling. So I knew one of the founders of the storytelling movement in India. She had given me some work. Her name is Geeta Ramanujam, and because of that, I knew about her. I knew about her work, and I knew about storytelling as a movement. So I thought, why don't I write a set of essays on storytelling? And I did that, and it was brought out as a book called Indian Storytelling Traditions. And sometimes when I go into the Kathalya office, even today, that people have told me that, oh, you're the author of Indian Storytelling Traditions. I picked it up for writing my dissertation on storytelling at Kathalya. So Kathalya is the organization that Geeta has founded. So, but the inspiration for that book, Indian Storytelling Traditions, and I followed it up with Indian Cultural Traditions, was this looking at the lens of culture through essays. And that was inspired by this particular book as well as by Susan Sontag's books. And this is something where Jeanette Winterson talks about why write poetry. And I would encourage all of you to start writing poetry, because poetry is something that is focused on language. So in fiction, we focus on stories. And in other genres, we have other focuses. So, like children's fiction, there's a lot of audience focus. But in poetry, the focus is on language. So if you get your language straight, you become unconquerable as a writer. And that's why these three writers are all poets also. So this particular essay is from a book review of not book review. It's a newspaper article which has been written by Jeanette Winterson, and it is on Carol Ann Duffy. And this is what she's written. Poetry is pleasure. Sometimes people say to me, why should I read a poem? There are plenty of answers from the profound. A poem is such an ancient means of communication. It feels like an evolutionary necessary to the practical. A poem is like a shot of espresso, the fastest way to get a hit of mental and spiritual energy. We could talk about poetry as a rope in a storm. Poetry is one continuous mantra of mental health. Poetry is the biggest long-running workshop on how to love. Poetry is a conversation across time. Poetry is the acid scrub of cliche. And I love that word, acid scrub of cliche. Because if we want to be writers, we can't be cliched. And these three writers are not cliched. And that's why we should all write poetry, so that we get out of writing in cliches. Because society, stereotypes, all these are cliches, language cliches. There's so many cliches. And we need to challenge all this and we can start by writing poetry. That's what we can do. And I feel all the three writers just stumbled down the rabbit hole, but they created wonderlands for us. They didn't see the wonderland, they created the wonderland for us. And I'm just stopping the share. So that was my presentation. And so all the three writers have really, really influenced me. And at various points, Margaret Atwood I started reading when I was in school, Jeanette Winterson and Suniti Navjoshi when I was in college. And but I never stopped reading them. Though I confess I couldn't read the Testaments, because at that point I was not in a dystopian frame of mind. But because for the purpose of this presentation, I went to the library and I got a lot of books, and I couldn't find Suniti Namjoshi books, so I had to pick it up from from Kindle. And but I knew that I could just I wanted to write about my experiences with these writers, and also why these writers are so significant, because all these three writers, and I would suggest, I know that many of you would have read Margaret Atwood, uh, Janet Winterson, and Suniti Namjoshi. When I picked the topic, I phrased it as writing the word, wording the rights, and that is what I phrased it. But when I started working on it, and when I was just looking at the material and I was just reading it, I just realized these writers are so similar. They share so much in common. And for me, the biggest inspiration in all this was Suniti Namjoshi, because she's an Indian writer and she shares so much with Margaret Atwood. So, which means all of us can share. And when I was rereading Margaret Atwood, I felt Dr. Lakshmi Priya is writing like Margaret Atwood. She's writing the same material. So, for me, somebody I know is doing that work. So it's so inspirational. So I would suggest that we keep reading these writers and model ourselves after them. So it's 3:25. Does anybody have any questions? Otherwise, I can just talk for some more time about writing and writing process and things like that.
Ma'am, we'll just check, ma'am, if anyone is having any questions.
Would you want to switch on your videos?
Yes, ma'am, I'll just ask them to.
Okay.
Participants, if anyone are having any questions, you can just please post it in the chat box.
There is a message from Mr. Balamurgan, and he said, excellent session, ma'am. Identified some new writers. Thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you, sir, for listening. So I would suggest just unmute and ask me your questions. I can talk. If you don't have questions, I will talk about the creative process and how we can all write, like we can draw inspiration from these writers. But first, just ask me questions. Gautami has said, great share, ma'am. Thank you. Okay, now I'm going to ask you a question. Since you are not asking me questions, I'm going to ask you a question. Can you think of one? Okay. Wow. Okay. Dr. Lakshmi Priya said that I was listening to you and writing a poem. So can you share your poem, Dr. Lakshmi Priya? So while Dr. Lakshmi Priya shares her poem, I'm going to ask you all a question. And the question is that, can you all think of one story? Okay, there is a message from Aarti. Ma'am, as we start with poetry, what should be the best thing to start with? So in poetry, it's all about language. So in fact, I can, one simple writing exercise is to start with I. Who am I? So just try to define yourself. Who is the I who is writing the poem? Who is the I who is conscious and who is writing the poem? So just write a poem about yourself. You start with that. It can be biographical, it can be autofiction, like Suniti Namjoshi and Janet Winterson have written. In poetry especially, there's a lot of autofiction that happens. A lot of, though there are fictional poems, there are poems which are addressed to fictional characters, and they're fictional narrative poems. But still, poetry as a genre is typically very much something that tends to be about a personal experience. I would also suggest look at Japanese forms like haiku. I mean, that's something I'm suggesting because I have been influenced by them a lot. So haikus are small poems. They're in 3 verses. You don't need to follow that word limit 575 and all that. But the idea of capturing an image. What is it that you capture in a poem is an image. And I would, since Dr. Lakshmi Priya is here, I'm going to ask her to read a poem and then we can discuss this further. We can't hear you.
I'm sorry. You were talking about rage and I couldn't stop. Listening the word, I had to write and I was writing as you were speaking. It's an unedited poem. I'm not able to copy and paste it because it's a bit bigger. but I would like to read a couple of lines from you. I'm dedicating this poem to you.
Okay, 1 minute. Just read the whole poem.
Okay. Like every day, I went into the kitchen, smelled the onion, moved my nose away. I looked at the overflowing sink, the leftover from loveless dinner, the empty beer bottles of conversation, less life. I tossed them in the garbage and stared at it. The rotten smell of the half-cooked eggs that lay with its shell wide open, not very different from me, with my legs spread. The chaos in the kitchen, reminiscence of chaos in our life. When I chose silence, you chose to ignore. When I chose tears, you chose to exit. Now that you have shut the door and left, I lit the stove and stared at the fire burn. I slowly dipped my fingers into the flame and I stared. With my other palm, I held my stomach, but instantly I took it away. For the burning was unbearable. Rage, rage, rage. Like the kangaroo that carries its child in Australia, I carried the anger in my stomach. I pulled my finger slowly from the flame. It came out smelling charred. I doused a little kerosene first, then a lot more on me. The fire from the stove crawled towards me. I stretched my arms and lifted it up, then held it close to my heart. We burned together, like the kangaroo that carried its child in its pouch, me and the rage. So this is what I have written.
That
It
was
has to be edited.
incredible. That was incredible. That is a wonderful. So, my next question, I'm going to ask Dr. Lakshmi Priya a question. Can you answer Aarti's question? When you start writing poetry, what should the best thing be? So, when you started writing this poem, how did you write it? Did you write it sentence by sentence, or did you have a? I mean, you thought you'd write about rage, obviously women's rage, but how did you go about the whole thing?
I think writing poetry is the only way sometimes women express their emotions on. And that's why I find women writers are fantastic when they write poem. Kamala Das, Sylvia Plath, I don't know, we can name them, we can keep naming them, because for women poetry comes naturally. It's a way they talk, it's a way their mind works. There is this organization of thoughts in your mind, right? I find that women cannot align their thoughts into words in the order, uh, and if they order it, it comes out like poetry. And metaphors are part of our life. Metaphors are not something that you have to create. I remember going to a creative writing session um, about 5 6 years back, and the first task that we were given by that professor who taught in New York University was to create metaphors. I was like, oh my god, how am I going to do it? And then he did tell me that all you have to do is open your eyes and look around. There is metaphors always around you, and that sort of inspired me. So for me, everyday living thing becomes a metaphor that I use, and I like to sort of bring it in my text as well as in the works of the author that I use. I mean, because whenever we read a story, we look for the metaphor and we want it to be held there. Like, hold that story together. That's the glue that holds the story together. And today, the metaphor that you gave, I mean, today, the word that you gave me was rage, and the metaphor was, I don't know, I was seeing this kangaroo that was burning.
Andrew
Yeah.
and the child.
And I thought I had to make the rage and kangaroo mine, and that's how this
Yeah,
poem
it
was.
was wonderful. The metaphor was wonderful, and it kept getting repeated. So there was that repetition of sound and word and image till it completely, fully took a full form of its own and a shape of its own. So Aarti said that was an amazing poem, ma'am. And Varshini said, excellent session, ma'am. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. What was your favorite takeaway from all the three writers? So my favorite takeaway was they were bold, they were audacious, they were witty, they were humorous, they just were amazing. And what was your takeaway from just reading, hearing some of the things they were saying, or just looking at their photos or looking at the book covers? Why don't you all share your takeaway? And I will ask Dr. Lakshmi Priya what her takeaway was.
My takeaway has always been one thing, particularly John Winterson. I know we disagree on the pronunciation. It's what is it? How do you pronounce it, Shweta?
Jeanette Winterson. I
Jeanette
heard
Winterson.
her speak. That's why I also
Okay.
confirmed also.
Okay. I
But
always
I'm sure
thought
she
that
didn't
it's a
mind
French
because
name
she
and it
wouldn't
has to
mind.
be Joe. It has to be pronounced Joe. Okay. Anyways, Jeanette Winterson. When I read her first time, I don't know. I find that embracing yourself is extremely important. Carol and Duffy, for that matter. Again, we can keep quoting women poet. Uh, the point is, they somehow it's not just about sexuality. As I was mentioning, even in my keynote address, I feel that the expression is important. And Janet Winterson, when I read, the first thing that came in my mind was she had to write a whole book to tell that, okay, fine, I am a lesbian, but that's okay, that's how I am. You have to understand me and you have to recognize me for what I am. And that I felt is super courageous. It's extremely what I feel women need at this moment. It's not just about sexuality, it's about everything. You just have to open up and tell to the world. I think it's high time that we do it in 21st century. Margaret Atwood, it's the same thing for me. Like, Edible Woman, I can keep quoting Margaret Atwood. There is this book called Alias Grace. It's about a serial killer. Actually,
Historical
it's
fiction.
not a normally people do not read it. I don't even know people I don't even have heard people talk about it much, but somehow that's my really favorite book.
And even
Surfacing.
Robber Bride, which is similar. Robber Bride. It's also about a woman who's like a criminal and all that.
Surfacing.
But Alice Grace, if I'm not, Susanna Modi's journals were translated, and Margaret Atwood was working on Susanna Modi's journals, and then she wrote. It was basically a real historical character, and then she wrote it. That's what I remember, if I'm not mistaken. But you.
I didn't know that. I just went with the story and I loved it. For me till date, it's my first favorite when it comes to Atwood.
For me, it was Good Bones, I think. And there's a message from Shubha Harini. Ma'am, few are good at their language fluency, but they lack in writing skill. So, what would be your suggestions to improve our writing skill, and which place a hindrance to fill their bag of success in writing? So, actually, I'll tell you what. For example, today morning I opened my Facebook and there was a message from a writing organization, and I won't name them, but they said that. No, top 10 spelling mistakes you make or something like that. That was the thing that I saw. And often we think that we need to get our spelling and grammar right, but actually we don't. We need to get our reading right. We need to keep reading, and we need to keep articulating, and we just need to take paper and pen and be bold and courageous with it. So if you ask me what does it take to be to write, we need to read extensively. We need to read and fill our lives with words. And we need to take a lot of blank paper and say, this blank paper is not going to be the way it is. It is going to change. It's going to be completely filled with ink now. And we have to keep writing. And as we write, there will be a change. So when it comes to language, don't worry about things like fluency or people telling you or people judging you or people feeling. In fact, we just have to be bold, because all these writers that we spoke about today, they've been judged and they've been asked not to write, and they're writing about things that they've created such an extensive body that when I had to do this lecture, I was scared about it, because I was like, how can I present people who have written so prolifically? So that is the thing in writing. To be a writer, you need to write. So just keep writing, and then editing will come in. Spend some time editing it, and then proficiency will come in. Everything will come in. But you just need to read and be courageous. And for that courage, we need to read people like Margaret Atwood and Suniti Namjoshi, and just keep reading. So Sony has written excellent session, ma'am.
And I do think if you're concentrating on the words or vocabulary or writing or things like that at the moment, you will not be able to express your thoughts. Only if you open up and embrace the chaos that your mind is creating, only then you will be able to write in first place. So just Just go with the flow. And there are so many editors, they will do the editing work. You don't have to worry about, whether my vocabulary is enough, whether my grammar is right. No, it's about expression. And that is the first thing, that is the most important thing as well in reading. And I think that is the only thing that will keep your audience engaged. Everything else, proofreading, everything, we have people who can do it. We don't have to worry about it. As a writer, tell your story. That's the most important thing.
So I think there's a feedback form and everybody can just fill the feedback form. So I give you one takeaway from this session. All of you can think of one fairy tale, international or Indian folk tale. If you want, you can type the name down like Cinderella, Snow White, and you can go back and just rewrite it. Look at the biases in that tale and see how you can rewrite it. So is anybody interested in just typing out names of folktales so that we remember what we are talking about, the cultural artifacts that we've been handed down, which have biases and stereotypes, but are still integral to being human? Priya, if you had to write a folktale or a fairy tale rewrite or something like Cinderella or Snow White, which one would you choose?
A fairy tale. There is a great deal of work done by Carol and Duffy and others. I don't know if I'm even fit to do it. Yet I would like my try in Cinderella, because I think that can be rewritten multiple times.
Yeah.
Everyone can have a take on it.
Yeah.
Even the frog and the princess, I don't know, that sounds so stupid.
Yes. I've recently written it, but I don't know if it's available now. I had written it and I posted it somewhere, but I have no idea where it is. So I worked on that story specifically. Actually.
I yesterday saw an interesting post in Instagram that was on frog and princess, and it was about how the princess just kissed the frog, and frog had forgotten its wife, because frog would have had a life before the princess came and kissed it, right? So it was the version of the frog's wife. So it was really fantastic, funny, and at the same time insightful.
Actually, this speaking of as you were speaking, I had this word association with monkey and the crocodile. It's a Panchatantra story, and in that there's a monkey and there's a crocodile, but the crocodile is not evil. The crocodile's wife is evil, so the evil wife corrupts the crocodile. So that misogyny in that ancient story, which is from India itself, that can be considered. So I just remembered when you're talking about the frog, so I remembered that monkey and the crocodile, it's not the crocodile who is, his wife makes him do the evil action. So are there any other questions or any comments on the session?
Anyone else who wants to ask any questions? Participants? If we don't have, can we move on with the...
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
It's highly a daunting task to get to know the perspectives of three legendary women, but you have made it possible, simple, and understandable through your voice, ma'am. Don't write it right, just write it and then make it right. Thank you, ma'am. I thank you, ma'am, for clarifying our doubts with patience. I also thank Madam Dr. Lakshmi Priya for sharing her metaphorical creation and interacting with us. Thank you, ma'am. You're really an inspiration for us. Expressing gratitude brings peace for today and creates a vision for tomorrow. Now I request Madam V. Chandra, Assistant Professor, PG and Research Department of English, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Warm greetings. On behalf
of the management, principal, PG and research department of English and the conference committee, I feel elated to propose vote of thanks. Gaining knowledge is the first step to wisdom. Sharing it is the first step to humanity. Thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing your knowledge with the sense of empathy. Ma'am, though these writers are familiar to us, the similarities of these writers, which your presentation has focused, gave us a deep insight. And concerning your presentation, with reference to these writers, a different perspective towards creative writing is being learned, like writing story in male point of view, engaging music in writing, use of robotic characters, focus on contemporary genetics, fixing different chapter heading, and even more. Ma'am, you made us to have a different perspective towards these literary personalities and motivated us to read the books mentioned in your presentation. Sure, ma'am, we read and try to perceive your perspective in the best possible way. Ma'am, on the whole, the progression of your speech, right from the brief account of the life of Margaret Atwood, Suniti Namjoshi, and Janita Winterson, till detailing the works of these writers with their specialization, is mind-blowing and impressive. Ma'am, like the presentation, your speech is too vibrant and colorful. You made the day, ma'am. Thank you so much and thank you. I also extend my special thank you, ma'am. I also extend my special gratitude to Miss Lakshmi Priya, ma'am, for her poem and her valuable inputs on the topic. We all enjoyed, ma'am. Thank you so much. Once again, I thank everyone for your active participation. We shall meet tomorrow with yet another interesting session. Thank you all.
Thank you, ma'am. Today's session. Thank you, ma'am. Today's session helped us to comprehend art in its truest sense. Our resource persons ignited a fire for creativity. So we anticipate learning more about it tomorrow. And we hope, dear participants, you too join hands with us tomorrow. Feedback link will be shared through Zoom chat box, YouTube description box, and WhatsApp group. Kindly fill it in due time. Thank you to each and every one of you for being part of with us today.